Oh, hey. So what, you guys see a campfire, so now you want to hear a nice spooky, Halloweenish, Octoberish campfire ghost tale? I got one for you. Let me grab a chair. What? You don't like change? All right, give me a second. Get my 6. All right, show of hands. How many of you have broken out the flannel? That's a lot of you. Okay, so I had a very interesting conversation today with a woman that I spoke of about 10 days or so ago, but I had never spoken to until today. You might remember, if you watch all these videos, I talked about one of my sisters who had a really neat experience with what a lot of folks might call a psychic, or a mystic, or a medium. I was so intrigued by this story and all the things that this woman told my sister, a woman who's like in her 90s now. I felt like I wanted to talk to her. And so I talked to my sister. I was like, do you think she'd talk to me? I don't want her to tell me about my future or, you know, what's coming down the pike. I kind of like the excitement of not knowing. But I'd just like to talk to her. Do you think she'd mind? And she said, well, you know, let me talk to her. So I was speaking with my sister again just yesterday. The sister, I have 3. It's the one that knows this woman. And she said, by the way, here's that woman's number. Here's her name. She said, it's okay if you call her. It's a bird. Never heard one like that. It sounded like a car alarm. So I called this woman, introduced myself, I told her who I was. And she goes, okay, so do you want to know about, and then she started talking about stuff in my personal life. And I never talked to her. And I'm like, wow, you really are amazing. How did you know that? And she laughed and she said, don't get too excited. I watched some of your YouTube videos. Your sister told me who you were, and I kind of wanted to know what I was dealing with before I granted any sort of permissions. I was like, oh, okay. Here I thought she was, you know, doing like a reading over the telephone. So I told her, I said, I just would like to maybe hear some stories, some of your experiences that you've had as a result of this gift, this gift you've been given. And she said, well, you might consider it a gift, and the people that watch your videos and videos like yours and read books like your videos and your books that I write, and by the way, I don't think I mentioned enough, but Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Volume 11 is available on Amazon now. 12 is going to be around before soon, so if you've missed out on 11, go get it on Amazon, print or Kindle. But she said, this is entertainment for people like you, and you refer to it as a gift, but what I can tell you is it's not a gift, it's a curse. And I said, well, why would you call it a curse? I mean, you can sit down with somebody you've never met and tell them so many things about themselves, like my sister. And I pointed out how you knew our dead grandmother's name. You knew I was coming back to America, and I was bringing my wife and my son with me in a time when my sister honestly didn't even know where I was. You knew about my sister would soon be reconnecting with the true love of her life, which has happened. And this is 5 years ago, and she's still with the guy. And I said, I would call that a gift, not a curse. And she said, well, maybe you do. Excuse me. Maybe you do. As you can tell, it's evening. I came up after dinner to do this. We're going to make some s'mores here later. So I just had some of my beautiful bride dearly, a.k.a. Giggly Girls, pancit, homemade pancit and lumpia. So you have to excuse that belch there. She said, I can tell you a story that happened, something when I was a young woman in my mid-20s. It's back in the 1950s, she said, that might help you view this more as a curse than a gift. And I said, I'm all ears. And I said, but before you tell this tale, because I have that's a gray squirrel back there just inside the wood line barking at me. I said, do I have your permission to retell this story on YouTube? And she said, you do, just don't use my name. And I said, okay, I won't. So she told me that she had a first cousin, another woman, another young lady in her 20s at the time, mid-20s, who was more like a sister than a cousin, and who was more like a best friend than a sister, but she was her cousin. And she had married a guy who worked in the field of psychiatry, and he didn't really like this woman that I was speaking with on the phone, because he just felt that some of the things she talked about was hocus pocus, and it wasn't logical, it wasn't rational. The human brain was not designed to be able to do the things that she could do. And he knew, because by golly, he was a psychiatrist. Well, there was this one summer when the good doctor was really stressed out. He'd finished up all of his schooling, gotten into practice, was seeing patients. And, you know, I knew a guy a few years back who was a psychiatrist, and he told me the importance about how he actually had a psychiatrist, and the importance of him taking breaks, because when you listen to other people's problems all day, every day, that gets to you. And I get it. I couldn't imagine, you know, when they're like coming to him for, you know, how do I fix my life? The guy was stressed out, and so he decided that he was going to take some time off and get away. He had to get away from where they were living at the time, because he didn't want his patients coming by the house or calling, because he wasn't keeping office hours. They ended up going up into New England, Maine, to take a respite. A couple weeks, they rented a cottage on the coast, but up on some cliffs. They had to walk down a very steep trail to get to the beach. Now, the doctor and his wife, who was the first cousin of the woman I spoke to today, are the only two that went on the trip. They wanted to get away from everybody. They picked a place that was not a tourist town, because they didn't want to, you know, be burdened having to listen to all the vacation all-stars. Maybe that squirrel's not barking at me. Maybe it's barking at whatever made that tree knock that was clearly heard. Oh yes, what's a vacation all-star? Well, they're usually a teacher from Ohio. That's just an example. No offense to any of you teachers from Ohio. You've probably heard of the book, The 5 People You'll Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom. I probably mispronounced his last name. I read that. I've read a few of his books. Got a couple on the pile I need to get to. I almost wrote a book a few years ago called The 10 People You'll Meet in America. And Vacation All-Star was one of those. I've talked before about the public loudspeaker. That's somebody you'll meet in America. Public loudspeaker, it's that guy or that girl. When you go out to lunch, you know, you and a friend, you and a coworker, you and your spouse, just want to go out and have a nice lunch. You know, there's maybe 12 different tables seated. There's always that one person that just wants to make sure that when they talk, they do it so loudly that everybody in that restaurant can hear what they're saying. I call that the public loudspeaker, and there's always one. Well, a vacation all-star, I use the example of a teacher because the last one that I had the displeasure of talking to happened to be a teacher from Ohio. Someone who, you know, is confined. They have a job where they can't just come and go as they please. They have to be there, you know, like all the time. But then when they get that opening, and it could be somebody that works, you know, for a corporation that gets their 2 weeks paid vacation every summer. And typically they're landlocked and they like to go to the beach, like a teacher from Ohio. Last one I met was at the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Just blah, 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 blah. You say, hey, how are you? Well, they tell you everything about themselves. And they don't shut up. They ask you nothing about yourself. But when you finally part ways with them after listening to them drone on and on and on about how second grade would not exist if it were not for them, because that's just how important they are down there at that job. You get away from them and they tell you, oh, I'm so honored to have met you. You're such a great guy. I really enjoy talking to you. And you want to just say, really? What's my name? Where do I live? What do I do? Because they don't talk with you or to you, they talk at you. So the good doctor and his wife didn't want to deal with any of these vacation all-stars because they didn't want to get more stressed out They wanted to relax. They wanted to have peace. So they found a cottage that was very secluded, high on this cliff in Maine. They went there, and they were greeted by a man who at the time would have been 70-ish. He gave him the keys, took him in the house, and there was one room in the house they were not to enter. He said, this is storage. This room is for storage. He said that he and his wife actually used to live in the house, but now they use it as a vacation rental, and they live in the next town over. So they were like, okay, great. But throughout the stay, if somebody's starting a mower, thank God, that sounded like a growl. Throughout their stay, the woman, the cousin of the lady I talked to today, she would sense movement out of the corner of her eyes, and she would look and there would be nothing there. And the good doctor at times thought he heard things. One of those things of which was a piano being played, but there was no piano in the cottage at all. And he was starting to think maybe he was going a bit crazy, and what's wrong with that? Hey, like, Norman Bates and Psycho says, we all go a little crazy sometimes, right? Don't judge. I don't judge. Stop judging, brah. So anyway, this went on for that first week there. And the cousin of the lady I spoke with today started getting nervous about it. And she wanted to call her cousin up. Of course, her husband said, no, that woman's all hocus pocus, thinks there's things that aren't. She probably needs to come see me for therapy. She doesn't need to be coming up here and ruining our vacation. And the wife said, you yourself have told me you've heard pianos playing, or you've heard a piano. You've sensed things that don't seem to be there. I think we need to have her come up. So she ended up going up to stay with them their last few days there. When she got there, she told me she had the overwhelming sense that a tragedy had taken place in this house. Murder. She just felt as if a murder had taken place in this house. So she would go around the house, but she couldn't pinpoint what had happened and where it happened. So she wanted to get into the room that was allegedly used for storage. So they went over to the next town and asked the guy to please come open up this room. Please come and open up this room. And he kept saying, no, we've got stuff stored in there and some of it's valuable. We just don't want to open that up to you. And the guy pleaded with him because the room, it had some windows that were overlooking. There was a yard that went out for about 20 yards, and then it was the drop off of the cliff. And there were curtains drawn over the windows. And the man thought, if I could open those curtains, sit in that room in front of those big bay windows, what a view that would be. That would help me relax. And so the guy very begrudgingly said, okay, here's the key to the room. Open it. Please don't disturb anything that's in there. But it does have a nice view. You can draw those curtains back, get a heck of a view of the ocean, the Atlantic. So they went back, they opened the room. There was only two things in that room. A beautiful fireplace opposite of the windows, and a big black piano. So the lady I spoke with today, she said that when she went in that room, she knew that that was the room where this tragedy had taken place, where this murder had taken place, but she didn't know what exactly had taken place. She would go into the room and she would meditate and try to get a feel for it. And she was in there just before dark. They only had a few days to go before their stay was over. And she was trying to figure out what is it that happened in this room. And she felt like she was being watched, but not by something from out of this world, but something from this world. She opened her eyes and she looked over at that bay window, and she saw the man who had given them the keys, the man who said he and his wife owned this cottage, looking in the window at her. And he pulled away and he just took off and he was gone. He didn't say hi, and she didn't go out. She assumed he might come in, or maybe he came by to speak to him, but he just left. So it's fine. It's still burning. It's burning down, but it's burning good enough. So she told her cousin and the good doctor, who didn't believe a word she said, that there was a murder in that room. Something took place in that room. So she would go there. She would spend time in this room. And the night before they were supposed to leave this cottage, she was in this room just at sunset. And a storm had moved in, so it got dark earlier, of course, because of the clouds. lightning crashed, and she went into like a trance that put her back into that room when the event took place. And what she saw was an older woman, about 60, sitting at the piano, playing beautiful piano music. And a man, who happened to be the man that owned the cottage, that gave him the keys, came up from behind this woman, choked the life out of her. She tried to come out of this trance. She tried to come out of seeing what she was seeing, but she couldn't. She couldn't do it. She saw the death of the woman. She saw the murder, and it's like telekinesis. The woman that was murdered, while she was on the floor, her spirit communicated with the medium and told her exactly what had happened. And as it turns out, the people who lived in the house was the woman who was murdered at the piano and her sister, who was a couple of years younger than her. They were what would have been known as, at the time, a couple of old maids. Their parents had money, that had a lot of money. These two women never married, and they were living at that house together. The man who owned the house, who gave the keys, turns out, was a handyman slash gardener slash jack of all trades for them, and he had been for many years. And he had actually at one point proposed to the woman he murdered. She was beautiful in her youth, and even after getting up there in years, she was still pretty easy on the eyes. He wanted to marry her, told her he'd fallen in love with her, getting to know her all these years, doing all these chores for her, doing all this work for her. And she laughed at him and told him that he only wanted her money, and there was no way that she was going to marry the hired help. I guess she's what you might call highfalutin, little bit uppity. So the man then turned his interest to the younger sister, who was not as attractive as the older sister, who maybe had probably spent a lot of her life in the shadow of the older sister. He proposed to her shortly thereafter. Well, the older sister told the younger sister, "Never, you will never marry this man, not while I'm alive. He only wants our family's money. Can you not see this? Are you that desperate?" Well, that man was going to marry that younger sister, and if it took for the older sister not being alive for it to happen, well, then that's what he would make sure happened. Killed her, choked her to death. And then he married the younger sister, and they didn't want to be in the house where this took place. I don't know how they got away with it. I don't know that part of the story, but they moved to the next town over, and they turned this cottage into a rental cottage. So just as the medium was finished being told this story by the spirit, she came out of the trance. She looked at the window, and that man was there again. And she said he had the look of the fear of God on his face, and she just screamed, "I know what you did." Not last summer, some summer back in the 1950s. And the man took off running at a sprint. She left the house and went out to try to catch him. He had thrown himself off the cliff to his unfortunate demise, because I guess he was afraid that if she knew, others would soon know as well. And then she said to me, "Do you want to call this a gift?" She said, "This, my young friend, is a curse. It's the worst curse you could imagine." And then she said, "If you ever want to hear another story about it, though, feel free to give me a call. I don't have a lot of time left, and you're enjoyable to talk to." Just kind of sounded like a vacation all-star. But of course it was a phone call, not we weren't on vacation. So there's your story. There's your creepy campfire story. And with it now being told, I got to get some more wood on this fire. Stick around. Come back again tomorrow for another one.